Hello, hello, hello. I'm so glad you've joined me here today, and I'm sure the title of this video piqued your interest because everything about breast cancer piques women's interest. This is Your Menopause Your Way, and I teach you absolutely everything that can affect the way you manage your menopause. And breast cancer has one of the most significant impacts on the way in which women manage their menopause. Very little of that impact is justified, but the goal is to know the facts and then manage your menopause any way you please. So I just deliver the information in a manner that you can actually use to make decisions about how to manage your menopause. So we are in the midst of a great big unit on breast cancer. This is video number 363. It's the 8th video in the unit, and believe it or not, it's the first video to address actual cancer in the breast. The title is What Makes Breast Cancer Cancer? All of the ones before this addressed breast anatomy and benign breast diseases, and they are all critical to your understanding of actual breast cancer. That's why you absolutely have to watch my videos in order if you want any hope of understanding everything. In my book, both the first and the second editions, all of chapter 30 is on breast cancer. But in the book, I just get right into breast cancer. I do not lead you through this process of understanding what makes breast cancer cancer. So that's why you need to watch this video. Okay, to get started, thus far you've learned that there are 3 kinds of benign breast diseases. There's proliferative without atypia, which is akin to hyperplasia here. There's proliferative with atypia, which is akin to both atypical hyperplasia and dysplasia. And there are the in situ diseases, which are akin to both dysplasia and neoplasia that is localized to its area of origin. And last week you discovered that the in situ diseases are inconsistent with all the rules that govern the differences between precancer and cancer. And that's why I thought it necessary to give you a tutorial entitled, What Makes Breast Cancer Cancer? So, to analyze this conundrum, let's first designate the telltale features that make any cancer a cancer. Cancer is defined as an uncontrolled growth of abnormal cells such that they invade surrounding anatomy. So the critical terms in that definition are uncontrolled growth, abnormal cells, and invasion. Last week you discovered that the definition of carcinoma in situ is an oxymoron because in situ means localized to its original location. But the word carcinoma means cancer, and by definition, cancer does not stay localized to its original location. Now, a cancer can be benign or malignant. A benign cancer is one that is confined to the organ of origin, has well-defined borders between the tumor and the surrounding tissue, is slow growing, and is treatable with surgery alone. Whereas a malignant cancer is one that is not confined to the organ of origin, has spread to nearby or distant tissues and organs, is rapidly growing, and requires chemotherapy and or radiation therapy for treatment. And there are cellular changes that precede cancers and define them as pre-cancers. Pre-cancers are cellular abnormalities that have the potential to become cancers but do not always do so. So what you have is a gray zone in which an entity that has the potential to become cancer has not yet done so. And the question becomes, well, what makes breast cancer cancer? In the case of breast cancer, the gray zone is the in situ category of diseases. Lobular carcinoma in situ and ductal carcinoma in situ. And these two entities have created mountains of chaos in the world of breast cancer. So let's compare these in situ diseases with the true invasive breast cancer to see their differences. And as we do so, we'll reflect back on the critical features that define a cancer as cancer. There are three: uncontrolled growth, abnormal cells, and invasion. And be forewarned that this tutorial draws on and utilizes information that I've delivered in previous units. Those previous units were the foundation. And if you haven't watched all the videos in all three of the previous units on cancer, you'll probably be completely lost. I gave you videos on cancer in general, endometrial uterine cancer, and cervical cancer. This is why you have to watch my videos in order. So with that, let's get started. The first critical feature to qualify as a cancer is uncontrolled growth. Uncontrolled growth means that there are too many cells. That's the same thing as hyperplasia. Remember this? Hyperplasia right here. Instead of the one row of normal cells, hyperplasia results in multiple rows of normal cells like this. But notice how orderly the cells are still. They haven't gotten out of line at all. There's just too many of them. And hyperplasia is not cancer. So if you have trouble seeing this, you see that the normal cells are all lined up just perfectly, just in one line, whereas hyperplasia here has multiple lines, multiple rows. So just having too many cells does not make a breast cancer cancer. But what about too many cells that get out of order? What if instead of the perfectly straight, orderly, excessive numbers of cells, there are excessive cells in terms of number and they become disorderly? Well, that would be a typical hyperplasia like this. A typical hyperplasia is here. Now, these cells are not all lined up in single file like the hyperplasia cells were. These are randomly organized, but they're all still the same size, and they're all still perfect in shape. And all that's happened so far is that they've gotten a little out of line. So all these cells are still normal. And so atypical hyperplasia is also not cancer. It has the potential to become cancer, but it has just as much potential to stay the way it is and never get any worse. The second critical feature to qualify as a cancer is abnormal cells. Now, abnormal cells can be dysplastic or neoplastic. Dysplastic cells are disorganized. That's this row here. And the degree of disorganization can vary from mild to moderate to severe. So dysplasia is the first instance in which you see some cells that differ in size from the normal cells. In other words, they're abnormal. The larger cells are abnormal. And just how abnormal they are varies. If the disorganization is really excessive to the point of having individual cells appear like cancer cells microscopically, they can be neoplastic. But the key here is that these changes are only within the individual cell and exist only on the microscopic level. This means that some of the individual cells, once you get to neoplasia, can be actual cancer cells. So once you get to neoplasia here, some of the cells are cancer cells. But notice that they are not all cancer cells. Some of them are still very normal. On these cards demonstrating neoplasia, the abnormal cells are the ones that are either a different size, or a different shape, or a different color. So everything that's not a pearl is a cancer cell. So these are different from the uniform cells. The number of cancer cells determines whether the degree of neoplasia is well differentiated, moderately differentiated, or poorly differentiated. So that's determined by how many of the cells are actually cancer cells. While any degree of differentiation can qualify as cancer, having neoplasia or even poor differentiation is not enough to make a breast cancer cancer. And that's because these abnormal cells haven't done anything wrong. They have not behaved in a manner consistent with cancer cells. They only look like cancer cells. And while there are microscopic cancer features inside some cells, it is not enough to constitute cancer. So neither the number of cells nor the abnormal appearance of cells is enough to constitute cancer. Designation as a cancer is determined by the third feature. The third critical feature to qualify as a cancer is invasion of surrounding structures. This is the big determining feature. This is what separates the cancers from the non-cancers. Invasion means that instead of the increased number of abnormal cells staying confined to their original location, they invade the surrounding anatomy. In other words, they break through the barriers of their confines. So cancer is dictated by how the abnormal cells behave. It's dependent on action, not appearance. So size and shape do not a cancer create, but invasion changes that. To demonstrate, I've made a prop. This toilet paper tube contains an overgrowth of abnormal cells. And I've actually made two versions of it on each side. On this side, all the cells are still the same size. There are just too many of them. So this side demonstrates a well-differentiated example of abnormal cells. This is an open version of the same thing so that you can see what's inside here, okay? Just so you understand they're all the same size. But if I turn this over to the other side, these cells vary in size and appearance. So this side demonstrates a poorly differentiated example of abnormal cells. And here's an open version of that. But notice that on both sides, all of the abnormal cells are still self-contained within the confines of the tube. And because they are confined to their location of origin, they do not qualify as true cancer. They may be pre-cancer, they may contain dysplastic cells, they may even contain neoplastic cells, but without invasion, they are not yet cancer. So they can be treated in a manner that just gets rid of them without much else. In contrast, here I I have another version of my self-made prop. This time you see that the abnormal cells have invaded through the wall of the toilet paper tube. And again, I've created one side to exemplify invasion of well-differentiated abnormal cells, and the other side to exemplify invasion of poorly differentiated abnormal cells. But you don't even need an open version to see what's going on inside this tube. And that's because this cancer has invaded the wall of the tube, and you can see what's going on inside, outside. And this invasion, my dears, makes this one cancer. So, this one is merely CIS, and this one is invasive cancer. That's the big difference. The true definition of cancer boils down to invasion. Before there's invasion, it's not cancer. Once there's invasion, it is. So when it comes to breast cancer, we use the term invasive breast cancer to define true cancer. Invasion is what makes all the difference. So invasive breast cancer is breast cancer that has invaded the boundaries of its place of origin and spread into the surrounding breast tissue. In other words, it's excessive numbers of abnormal cells that have invaded their boundaries. Now, this brings us back to what we discussed in the last tutorial. Lobular carcinoma in situ and ductal carcinoma in situ are not true cancers. Those belong here. This is in situ disease, and whether you have this, well, I should put it over here so it's more differentiated on that side, or this, either way, it's still carcinoma in situ. If you assess these using our 3 criteria for true cancer, they do not meet all 3. Our 3 criteria are uncontrolled growth, abnormal cells, and invasion. They do have uncontrolled or excessive growth of cells, too many cells. And the cells are abnormal to some degree, either dysplastic or neoplastic. But they have not invaded the surrounding anatomy or broken through their barriers. So they qualify as precancer. They are not invasive cancers. Whether or not they would ever become invasive is entirely unknown. Just because they have the potential does not mean that they'll do it. And so our cancer, our invasive cancer, is here all by itself. Now, I know my props aren't very professional, so here are some photos of a breast duct showing progression from normal to DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ, to invasive breast cancer. Here's one of the photos. First one is normal, second one is DCIS, the third circular structure is invasive carcinoma. And here's the very same thing again, and here's the very same thing again. In all 3 photos, you can clearly see the difference between the mass of cells that are securely inside the wall of the duct compared to the escape of cells outside the duct. That escape constitutes invasion of the surrounding anatomy and turns it into a cancer. Here's a breast model that demonstrates invasion right here. Just this part right here. You see how it shows these areas starting to emanate down into the tissue? Now there's all sorts of other stuff here, and this is why I like to make my own models, because too much stuff is always confusing. The only thing that pertains to invasive breast cancer on this model is right here. So the answer to the question, what makes breast cancer cancer, is invasion. Invasion is the big divide between the two. And when you apply this principle to cancers other than breast cancer, It always holds true. But there isn't rampant fear of other cancers. And that has made a huge difference in everything pertaining to breast cancer. It's turned it into a beast. I guess we could call it the breast cancer beast. With breast cancer, this difference between pre-cancer and actual invasive cancer has become so fuzzy and gray that it's almost non-existent. You began to see that last week when we made this chart depicting the inconsistencies between other precancers and the in situ lesions of the breast. So instead of calling them precancers, LCIS and DCIS are called carcinoma in situ. This is despite the fact that carcinoma means cancer and in situ does not. This is also despite the fact that carcinoma implies invasion and spread, whereas in situ does not. Other cancers do not have a stage 0, but that's precisely how LCIS and DCIS are defined. The very same cellular changes in the cervix are called cervical intraepithelial neoplasia, not carcinoma in situ. But both CIN of the cervix and CIS of the breast consist of localized abnormal cells. And CIN of the cervix is treated with only local destruction or removal of the CIN cells, whereas CIS of the breast is treated with local or global excision followed by radiation therapy and or chemotherapy. This failure to clearly distinguish between precancer and invasive cancer is one of the many problems that have made breast cancer such a beast. The ramifications of this failure to clearly distinguish the two are enormous. And as we progress through this unit, you'll see evidence of this again and again. You'll also see evidence of it in breast cancer statistics, which is what I'll present next week. But it won't be boring. So today's summary is this. There are 3 critical features that define a cancer as a cancer: uncontrolled growth, abnormal cells, and invasion. The precancerous LCIS and DCIS lesions of the breast do not meet the qualification of invasion. Nevertheless, they are perceived, managed, and feared as true invasive cancers. Only when the excessive number of abnormal cells have invaded through the boundaries of their original location does a breast cancer become a cancer. Okay, ladies, that's enough for today. Come back in a week to learn some comparative statistics on breast cancer. Do not hesitate to schedule a consultation with me at menopausetailor.me. It's one of the most beneficial things you could ever do for yourself. You'll get more out of a consultation than you can possibly imagine. And because I do them all via video conferencing, you can have a consultation regardless of where you live. I also urge you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, you receive useful information every 2 weeks. Following me on Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and Stories will give you glimpses of what you can get elsewhere in this education. Okay, bye for now.